this week for our movement of the week, we're gonna be going over incline dumbbell presses. Let's go ahead and just take it bottom with the setup, all the way from the foundation. So I really prefer shallow inclines if I'm doing any kind of incline dumbbell press. I don't like it to be like 60 degrees. If I'm doing like even a 45-degree angle, I would much rather prefer that to be a little bit more delt focused. So I need to have a reason behind it being like a 45-degree angle. So this right here is about 30 degrees. And this is typically like the steepest I'll go if I'm wanting to mostly bias my pecs. So just keep that in mind. Steeper angles are generally what I prefer. It just makes a little bit more sense, a little bit more comfortable, especially for like more horizontal pressing. Also make sure that the seat is popped up as well, if you're able to, if the bench that you're using allows that, because what you don't want is you don't want an inclined back in a flat seat and to be pressing and having your butt sliding down. You want something that's actually going to be stopping you here that you can sink down into, like an elevated seat like this. So as we're going through the movement, it's gonna be important to figure out how do we get set up? How do we get the dumbbells in position, not only from our thighs, but also actually into the start position, because this is very different from a barbell press, obviously, right? We have two individually moving components. You have to get them all the way back into our start position. So there's just a lot going on, a lot of complexity. So whenever we are starting with two dumbbells, we can either start from the floor like this, and if we're starting from the floor like this, I prefer to make sure that I'm steady, stable, and I can pick them up in a safe way. Obviously, as we just saw, the dumbbells are a lot closer to the ground than a barbell, and they're a lot more awkward. So almost always you have to pick them up in a less than safe way. Don't always recommend that for 90% of people. So if you're able to, set the dumbbells on a bench like this in between sets. So then whenever you're ready to go, you can just pick them up, get them into position on your thighs, sit down and get ready to go. So from this position, we're gonna have to kick them back. So how do we kick them back? So I like keeping the dumbbells about mid-thigh because that allows for a really good force transfer whenever I go to kick. So if this were flat, I'd be able to much more easily just kind of shift my body weight back into it and just kind of roll. Because it's inclined, I actually will have to kick them back individually to make it actually work the best. So here, just above where my knees are, bottom of my thighs, make sure that I'm right in line with the bench so I don't miss. And one at a time, we're gonna go kick back. Whenever you're fully set, press all the way up. Then from here, make sure that your feet are stable and flat into the floor. Make sure that your upper back is in contact with the bench as well as your head. And then you just start your rep. So you wanna make sure that everything is stable. Bring the dumbbells down at a slight angle. So you'll see here that I'm not flared. I'm not pressing with my elbows flared out into a fully pronated position. Because we're using dumbbells, we actually have the luxury of rotating in a little bit and finding a much more comfortable pressing angle and path with our arms and our shoulders than with a barbell. So go ahead and go with that path. So for me, that's slight rotation here, allowing my elbows to travel down at a slight angle, keeping them a little bit tighter to my torso, and then pressing back up. And whenever you're done with your set, the easiest way to go about this, in my opinion, is to bring them down to your knees, back down, but you also obviously can just bring them all the way back down to the floor. So as we're going through the mistakes for incline dumbbell presses, it is really important to remember this is a very complex movement, a lot of moving parts. So we're not gonna be able to get to every mistake that is gonna be happening, but we can highlight a lot of the really common ones. So first really common one is just going to be the very beginning of any kind of dumbbell press. How do we get the dumbbells in position? So if you're picking the dumbbells up like what I mentioned in the cues, you wanna make sure that they're from an elevated surface, especially if you're using really heavy dumbbells. If you're picking them up from the floor, there's just a really high likelihood that you're gonna put yourself and your body in a position that is kind of risky. So here, dumbbells are on the floor. The only real way for me to get them up is to kind of put my spine in a vulnerable spot through just like loaded flexion. So here, this is really the only easy way for me to get the dumbbells up, and I'm kind of in a bad spot. I mean, I could also try and squat down, but like there's just really no easy way to do that. So mistake number one is picking the dumbbells up like shit. So once you have them in position here, mention it briefly in the cues, how to kick them back. So kicking back is a very complex topic. Won't get all the way into it. If you've been following along with the training club since the very beginning, you'll know that I did a tip video on how to properly kick back dumbbells at the very beginning, but it is important that you know how to kick dumbbells back correctly, because if you don't, you're going to waste a lot of energy and again, put yourself at a high injury risk, because there are heavy loads that are dynamically changing in and around your body. So you have to be able to control them. And if you're not able to control them, then it's just going to not necessarily work out that great. So that is mistake number two. Really, really, really big one. If you can't get the kickback down correctly, it is going to severely limit what you're able to do on the movement. Then, once you're actually in position, you're performing the movement, like what we talked about before, what are we doing with our elbows? So our elbows need to be in the position that we can express the greatest strength, and that also will allow us to keep the most shoulder health and integrity. So it's not going to be this full flare position, because that is just putting a lot of stress on our soft tissues. So that is just jamming our shoulders up, stretching our pecs in a way that is not very comfortable. And instead, like what we talked about, we should keep a slight rotation, a slight tuck of our elbows, make it semi-pronated so that we can press in a comfortable path here. And then lastly, what we're gonna talk about is how to actually strain through dumbbell presses. So because we are not using any kind of fixed modality like a barbell or machine or something like that, as we start to get closer to failure, it's very likely that one arm is going to fail before the other does. So you're most likely not going to have systemic failure where everything just looks beautiful and coordinated. It will probably look kind of ugly. So with that being said, you want to make sure that you do not try to overcompensate through any kind of failure pattern on an incline dumbbell press. Because what that's going to do is that's going to, again, put you at a high likelihood of injury or dropping a dumbbell on your face. So for most people, what ends up happening is they're repping dumbbells out, they're going, everything is great. Then they get to a point where they're straining. Let's say they get to here, and then their left arm is going, their right arm is not, and they start leaning into it like this, and then inevitably, boom, they drop a dumbbell on their head. So instead, if you get to this point and you're straining, that right arm is just not going up, make sure that you don't rotate, and instead, if you just can't get it, bring it back down, accept it, and then come back. Or if you have a great spotter, just assume and trust that they will kind of guide you into that lockout. But the last thing that you want to do is try and rotate to finish the rep, because that is a really, really good way. Dropping a dumbbell on your face, not what we want, not going to be long-term beneficial for growing your pecs or anything like that.